Well, welcome back to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. As always, it's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and I love it. I love it that you come back week after week. If it's your first week, welcome on board. If it's your 400th episode you're listening to, then I'm sorry, but no, thank you very much. It's great. It's going to be a good episode, this one. I've been thinking about this one for a little while, and I want to put my hand on your shoulder and say it's okay. This is the very last part of summer. This is when things start to appear that maybe show flaws in some trees, some weakness. There's been some damage done, so I just want to put my hand on your shoulder and say it's okay. It's all right. We've got to work on a plan to improve things. More often than not, when I've come across it recently, it's freshly acquired trees. And by freshly acquired, I mean you possibly haven't had them long enough to get them repotted. And any weakness in that root system, by now, after some intense weather, you are going to be seeing the downside to possibly purchasing stock or trees that maybe haven't been maintained to a good enough standard. And it's okay. It's all right. We can get through it. We will get you through it, and you will come out the other end, and your tree will come out the other end a lot stronger. But I want to talk a little bit more about that. I want to talk about a certain type of style of bonsai as well, a formal upright, and just some considerations to go through, because I do find it is a style that is attractive to people because it is very formal. But there's a lot of considerations you need to go through before acquiring the stock. So I've chatted about that. And it's also time to start thinking about pot acquisition. Now that sounds insane, but it's not. I promise you, it's going to come around a lot quicker than ever. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also, you would have noticed on the last episode a bit of new music across the podcast. Now that's very special thanks to a mate of mine who's also a fellow bonsai lover who I've known for a very long time. Stu, thank you very much. Really appreciate you putting your effort into it, mate. It's greatly appreciated. All right, let's get into the podcast. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere and listening to this now, it's late in February. You are hopefully coming out of the cooler period, getting ready for repotting and all that sort of stuff, and spring's just around the corner. For us down south in the Southern Hemisphere, especially where I'm from in Australia, we're coming to the end of the formal summer period. We definitely get some warm weather hanging around as we get into our autumn period or fall, whatever you call it. But I do find that right now, this period over the last couple of weeks, is when I get a lot of contact. I see it myself in a few of the trees around my yard, but it's the time of year where I find the most visible damage occurs to your trees, because as they come into summer, they've still got maybe some residual strength. Their root system's still okay, but by this last part of summer, when we've had those really long, dry, hot spells, or even humid spells, but it's been hot, it's just been really uncomfortable and really tough on the trees. And, a couple of those, I find in Melbourne, when we get a northerly wind that's blowing a gale, it's an offshore wind. So the heat's coming from inland Australia and it's blowing out across. It's like someone's left the oven door open, and it can tend to bring down any weak trees pretty quickly, especially when it lasts for sort of 2 or 3 days in the high 30, low 40 mark, which we've had. And it's been probably our hottest summer, I think, for at least probably 3 years that I can remember anyway, where we've just copped it day after day, and it's just been consistently hot. And like I said in the intro to the podcast, I'm here to put my arms around you and say it's okay, because I feel your pain. If you don't have trees that are in this position, then that's fantastic. That's a gold star moment for you, and I mean that wholeheartedly, because it's very hard to get your trees to a level where they're thriving through these hot periods. It definitely shows any chink in your armor anywhere along the way, and you can be ploughing water into these things. All it takes is one mistimed application of that cooling or the water for the trees, by even an hour, and you start to see the impact. It finds flaws in your watering system. Anything with a black spot which is what I found the other day. It's not a funny story, but I had a sale day, moved on some trees, and as I was putting trees back on the bench, I went, I've got a little bit more room. I'll shuffle things around, put different trees in different spots. Walked away. Yep, that looks perfect. Go out there after one hot day. It's watered twice already. Go out there. It's busy in the morning. Go out in the afternoon to have a look at the trees. And lo and behold, one of my trees has got a little bit cooked on the leaves. It's like, how can that be? But when I'd shuffled trees around, some foliage got in the way of one of the sprayers. The other side was covered by another tree. Anyway, it just showed up a little bit of a black hole. So it happens to every single person. And everyone listening to this podcast will have stories like this. So don't fear. But I think it's a good reminder, or it's timely reminder as we get to the cooler months. Don't forget where the trees are at right now. Don't forget the trees that have struggled. I always use a bit of a flagging system to say this tree probably didn't do as well as what it could have during the summer period. It possibly got sheltered more than what it needed to be during the hotter period because I was worried. So therefore, how do I fix that problem? How do I make it that this time next year I'm not putting that tree into the green bin, or I'm not cursing myself for not having done something? And first and foremost, it's going to be really important to make sure that I get that tree repotted when it comes time for me to do it, and to make sure that I'm also going to be applying fertilizer as much as the tree can take it up during the autumn period. I know the root system's not great, but I still want to make sure that I'm heavily fertilizing during that autumn period to make sure that the tree can get as strong as it possibly can. So get through the repotting period, spring comes around, start fertilizing again, and try and build up the tree's strength. And next summer, this time I might be doing a review on that tree saying it did better, but possibly didn't do great. All right, so what do I have to do then? And I can just my strategy for making sure all my trees takes a step forward is all based around this thought process right now. So I look at all the trees. How have you done? Are you thriving? That's fantastic. Does that mean I don't need to repot you? Possibly not. It's a matter of making sure that I stay on top of the tree's health and making sure that it's always at the peak condition every year on year growing. So that might mean that I look at them and go, it's done fantastic, done really well, no leaf burn, doing awesome. It grew really well. Could it grow better? If it stays in that pot, what does the soil feel like now? Like as we get into this autumn period and it's going to have more root growth, what's going to happen to the capacity that's based in the pot? Is it going to reach maximum capacity? Yes, it is. If it's still a bit soft when I push down it, no, it's still got another year to be repotted, so I don't need to flag it. So there's lots of considerations, and definitely the weaknesses that have been exposed now. I'll roll it back a little bit. There's trees that were repotted that possibly didn't grow roots strong enough. They're a delicate variety, especially my big beech that I've got, where a few of the leaf tip have been burnt. Does it upset me? No, it doesn't upset me because I know next year it'll get stronger again and it'll be okay. And the leaves dry out and go brown, so I'm not going to have an impact on that. Maples that have got a little bit of leaf burn on them, yeah, sure, that's going to really impact on the autumn colour that I'm going to get to see. But it's just like I said, it's just a matter of making sure that you're on top of your game for next time. And look at the trees that have struggled. We're so close to the end of summer now that you should be okay. Put them in a really sheltered spot, aerate the soil, do whatever it is that you have to do. Make sure that they're flagged for repotting and get into the fertilising that's coming up. And that's next week's topic on the podcast, is to talk about fertilising, because lo and behold, we are into the autumn period very soon, and that's when I start stinking out the neighbours with all these tea bags full of fertiliser. So your hard work, you either get a pat on the back this time of the year, or you get a reminder that, hey, don't lose sight of things. But even if you get that pat on the back, make sure that it's next year you get it as well. So don't be lulled into a false sense of security saying, well, everything's perfect, I've done well, I don't have to worry about it next year. No, it just means that you've got to be on your game with repotting and making sure that your system doesn't fail. Like me with the black spot that gets brought to my attention through dramatic pose of my tree, showing me that, hey, I've got crispy leaves now and there's nothing you can do about it. This close to autumn, would have been nice to have seen some autumn colour on this liquid amber, but anyway, it's the way it is. Luckily, it's not my big monster that lives outside my workshop, but it is another one that's been impacted, and I'm not completely happy about it. But anyway, that's just a reminder for me to make sure that when it is hot like that and I'm running watering systems because I'm not there, maybe I do a bit of a trial run first and keep an eye on things. But anyway, there we go. A new or a different bonsai pot can be like a fresh pair of shoes for your tree. It'll make them look and feel completely different. And I know we're still a long way away from repotting, but now's the time that I strongly encourage you to consider your collection, look at where you're maybe not entirely happy with the combination between tree and pot, not just size, but everything that goes with the pot, the texture of the pot, the colour of the pot, the shape, the style, the feel. Does it match? Is the pot too formal for the informal tree? Could it be better? Does the pot need to be bigger? Does the pot need to be smaller? Does it need to be shallower, deeper? Does it need feet? Does it need to go smooth around the edges? Whatever it is, it's a really good time now when you're not under the pump or under pressure to start having a look around. And hot tip for you, pots are generally cheaper now than when we get into a high demand period, which is close to winter, mid late winter. I find that's when prices can start to creep up around the place, especially online and whatever else. So if you're hunting for pots now, I think you'll be better off. But it also, like I said, from my point of view, I am, if you haven't guessed it, I love being prepared. I love planning. I love making sure everything's spot on. I've got a class running in another day. I've got everything out. I've wiped over the benches. I've got the tools out that the beginners are going to be using. I've sharpened everything. I've got seats wiped over. I've got the place vacuumed, for goodness sake. I've got the trees all lined up. And I've still got 24 hours before I have to do anything with it. But for me, I know that I'll sleep better or I'll rest easier knowing that I've got all my ducks lined up. When you've got bonsai, I think to successfully curate them and look after them and develop them, you've got to be extremely prepared. And pots for repotting is one of the big ones that I find can be left to the last minute, and then you're forced to accept rubbish, chipped, cracked, broken, or maybe you just go, oh, forget it, I'm just going to put it back into the same pot this year because I haven't organised anything, it'll be fine. But considering that repotting is every 2 to 4 years, let's say on average, that's a really long time to have to look at that tree in that pot and maybe not be completely satisfied about it. So even though you might feel like I'm going on about something which is not going to affect you yet, I trust me. I promise that getting on the front foot about it now, reaching out, considering different things, I guarantee you're going to be in a much better position. And repotting season's not that far out. And I've already started coordinating all my mixed components of making sure that I've got all the mesh that I need, all the tie and wires, everything's getting ready now. I don't have it all, but everything's getting ready now. So when it does happen, I know I can just walk straight into that process, that period of time, and go, you know what, everything's okay. I've got this thing sorted. So this is just a bit of a community service announcement for you inside the bonsai world, that if you are looking to repot, I would use it as a nice spend time with your bonsai period where you can look at your trees, maybe do a bit of a review, shoot out to your mates, ask questions if you've got doubts. What do you think? I'm looking at this. Stuff around with your phone and take photos of pots and superimpose it over the tree and see if it's going to look better. You've got time. Definitely got time, but get onto it early. Much better to be prepared than not. Now, you may or may not know this about me, but I am not a stickler for classifying bonsai, mine or anyone else's, into a defined shape, except for windswept, wind affected. I really don't like sitting down with a tree. For myself, this is my personal experience. Being completely honest, I don't like sitting down with a tree with the thought in mind that, hey, I'm going to make a semi-cascade, or I am going to force this tree to be an informal upright, whatever it is. I think that from my experience with me, and this is not relating to anyone else, this is just me, I find that it makes the bonsai feel a little contrived at the end of it. And I may make compromises that can't be hidden or shouldn't be hidden, but you can't get around that. You're always going to look at and go, yeah, sure, this is a full cascade, but look at that. That doesn't look right. The way that it comes out of the pot and cascades down, that part of the trunk will never, ever look right. But I was determined to make it a cascade because that's the preconceived idea I had prior to getting my tools out. So I'm going to proceed with it. Anyway, if you do want to make a certain style, and in this section of the podcast, I want to talk about formal uprights because I believe that they are one of the hardest to get right, but they're very common. The request for helping make a formal upright is very, very common. I get asked it quite a lot, and I think that there's a few key considerations that need to be taken into account when you. Well, if you've got the thought that you want to make a formal upright, before you're getting the stock, before acquiring anything, you've got to make sure that it can tick a few boxes, because if it can't, then I'm afraid it's going to be one of those things that you're going to compromise on. And somewhere down the line, it's going to feel unnatural. It's going to disappoint you, and it's just not going to be one of these trees that's going to stay first and foremost in your mind as one of your best trees that you've got in your collection. So that's why when I was putting this together, I've got one formal upright in my collection, and even that's I've had to compromise on. It's it's got things around the apex of the tree that I have to hide away and whatever else. But all in all, it certainly meets my requirements for a formal upright. But one of them, I just want to go through the key considerations when you are looking at stock, and I'd strongly suggest that when you do style trees, let the tree dictate to you. Let the tree indicate and say, hey, listen, I've been growing like this, and I'm naturally inclined to be a semi-cascade because look at my trunk, that's the way it's going. Or, hey, look at my trunk, I'm a formal upright, I am perfectly straight. So the trunk is going to be the one that's going to determine for you whether it's going to be a formal upright. And one of the things you want to look for with the trunk is taper. It's got to go from thicker to thinner very, very consistently right the way up to the apex of the tree. So if you're going to have a tree that's a formal upright that's 30 centimeters or 1.5 meters tall, whatever it is, you've got to have taper consistent across the entire tree right the way up. So thicker to thinner all the way down. You want to have, I would suggest that you would look for a tree with lack of scarring, or that scarring can be put around to the backside of the tree. So you're just looking at perfection of the trunk line up and down. Avoid trunk chops. If you look along one, which is what mine has, if you look at the style of the tree and you see taper, but there's at the top of the tree there's suddenly a trunk chop that's happened. At that point where the trunk chop's happened, invariably there's going to be a branch that's left that's then going to become the apex of the tree, but that will start growing out from the trunk in a horizontal-ish nature and then start to go vertical. You want to avoid that because the perfect formal upright has got natural taper with no deviation on that trunk. It is it's like a pin. It's dead straight. So if you are hunting for stock, the trunk is going to be the key indicator for you whether or not it can possibly be a formal upright. So that box has got to be checked. Taper, lack of scarring, lack of trunk chops. All right, the next thing you got to think about is your branch positioning. You want to be looking along the branch, the trunk, and looking for the position of those branches. Now, you can have them where you remove them, go back to point one, minimal scarring, but you can, depending on the type of bonsai that it is, the species that you're working with, deadwood is an option on, say, juniper or something like that. So branch positioning is super important. You want to think about, without an exact replica, but when you're looking at raw stock, look for the ability to do like a spiral staircase. It doesn't have to fit the mold. And please, I'm not saying that it has to be left, right, back, all the way up the tree, but you want to see branches on different planes and different positions around the trunk nice and consistently. So the tree can get branches coming forward, to the sides, to the back, whatever it is, so they're evenly rotating around. I see one of the common things I see that's a problem with formal uprights is a left-right branch structure with no depth, no back branches, no front branches. So you don't want your branches to always be horizontal to each other, left and right. Bringing them forward, pushing them back, giving you depth, giving you volume on your trees is really important, no matter what the styling, but super important when it comes to formal uprights. So while we're talking about branches too, the branch length is a major consideration. Really good formal uprights, and if you have a hunt around, you'll see that a lot of good formal, or what I'm attracted to about formal uprights is quite a short branch structure as well. So you don't want these things with really long branch before you get to the foliage. You want that foliage in nice and close to the trunk line, and keep them as a sharper angle up towards the apex, as opposed to a really wide, broad tree, because the wider and broader the branches, the less significant the trunk is going to look. So for a formal upright, you really want that trunk to be the absolute champion of the design. So keeping that foliage in nice and close on the branches is a key consideration. So like I said, a lot of this has to be done, these boxes have to be checked by you before acquiring the stock. Because acquiring the stock, looking at the trunk line and then going, hey, the trunk looks great, but oh, hang on, the branches are really long, and there's the foliage is a mile out. Oh yeah, I can curve those branches in. Nah, that's not how formal uprights works. That snaking of the branches to bring them back in is not going to be something which will be viable to keep your design formal, to keep it structured. So branch length and branch positioning around the trunk are absolutely key. Another one you've got to consider is the species that you're working with. So if you got to wrap your head around it. Like Australian natives, let's start with them. I don't think I've ever seen a formal upright that, maybe a Banksia. I'll change my mind, but a lot of the native species that grow, whether as bonsai or in nature or whatever, not everything we do has to imitate nature. It's perfection. It's an art. So I'm not saying that you have to style your trees as you see them grow in the garden or in fields. That's not how it works. But there's very few formal upright Australian natives that I've really come across that I've looked at and gone, wow, that's amazing. But that said, like I said, Banksia, I do have recollection of a formal upright Banksia that does look great. Come to Japanese maples. Again, it's a species that I've never really wrapped my head around being in the formal upright tradition. Normally I picture them myself as a bit of an informal upright, or maybe a slanting, for want of putting a category onto these things. But it's formal upright and Japanese maple are two words that really I've not heard. Not that it can't be done. Definitely not that it can't be done, but I don't picture it when I think about that species. So you just need to be careful. You can think about a Japanese a juniper. 100%. Definitely seen junipers as formal upright. In fact, that's probably the most common variety that I've seen. Pines, yep, sure. Yep, conifers in general, yeah, I think that they're definitely more suited to that type of growth. Spruce, definitely. They're ones that I think are ideally suited to being a formal upright style. So I suppose I'm just trying to not offer a word of caution, because you can do whatever you want. It's your bonsai journey. But I'm just thinking of the future of you and the connection with this bonsai that you're going to be putting your thumbprint on, and it's one that you want to be perfect. You want to get out of bed with a spring in your step to go and see this tree in your yard because you've designed it beautifully for the last 40 years. Not get 2 years down the track and go, yeah, you know what, it just doesn't work. I'm just not happy with it. I'm going to go back and start that again and chop the trunk off and rebuild from this bottom branch here, and it's going to be an informal upright. I think that if you can sort of tick these boxes, so you've got the trunk, you've got the branches, you've got branch length, and you've got the species that you're working with, then you're perfect. You're a long way along the path. So another consideration that I think seriously needs to be taken into account is not just the styling of this tree that you've got in front of you that you're making formal. It's also the thought that this bonsai, as being a formal upright, is going to go into a formal pot, because the pot and the tree, the shoes and the jacket, they need to work together. And if you're working with a species, and for me, I think that a formal upright maybe has got a very shallowish type pot. Maybe it's not not too wide for the tree. Anyway, so that's going to mean a smaller root ball. So the species that you're working with, can they handle their root ball being reduced like that? If you're and it doesn't need to happen as you style the tree. Of course, you can reduce root ball down in size to suit the tree over over multiple repottings. It could be over a 6-year period. You're reducing the root ball down because there's no rush. Remember, but I think about, say, a species like a radiata pine, and they love water. They can handle going into shallower pots, but there's definitely greater considerations when it comes to watering and repotting frequency, which then affects the needle length on the tree, all that stuff. So you've just got to wrap your head around so many different factors when it comes to formal, that you can see why these things, you can put a lot of work into them, but you can also see where maybe they never get the chocolates, because they never get there in the end, because you're doing all this work on them, and there's so many considerations to tick that box to say it's a formal upright bonsai, that it's very, very hard. It's very difficult to get right. So, I'm not trying to turn you away from doing the formal upright, because I think they're a lovely style. Like I said, I've got one in my collection. I've only got one because I can't. It's very rare to come across a tree that I find that can tick so many of these boxes to get to the point where I go, mine's got trunk chop at the apex. Could I work around it? 100%. Can I, build the apex around that and have it so it's not an issue? Definitely can. Is it a compromise? Yeah, it's a compromise, but it's one that I'm more than happy to live with. And I love this tree, love this big Femina juniper that I've got. And would I swap it? No chance. No chance would I. So don't take anything that I'm saying to be negative about a formal upright. I'm just saying that these are things which will help you achieve your goal of owning or styling a formal upright a lot quicker than I suppose me learning the hard way, or you going through the process and suddenly realizing years down the track that possibly it hasn't turned out exactly the way that you'd hoped. So formal uprights are definitely a species or a style for certain species that works really, really well. I love them. They're bloody hard to get right, and they need a lot of consideration before acquiring the stock. Don't acquire the stock and then go, well, I'm going to take this twisty little juniper and I'm going to stake this thing dead straight. Look for the dead straight juniper that you can then guide to stay on that path. It's much easier. It'll save you a lot of heartache, I can promise you. Well, enjoy the last little piece of our summer period. I know that in the depths of winter, when it's freezing and I'm out there weeding trees and whatever, I'll be bitching and moaning and begging for some warm weather to come back again. But like I've said for the last couple of episodes, it's about time for summer to move on now, because it's been a bit draining. Trees need a bit of a break, which is, it's always the case. It always happens that I feel this way at the end of summer. When summer comes around again, I'll love it. And you'll hear me say, it's one of my favourite seasons. They're all my favourite season. But anyway, I do encourage you strongly to just have a look at your trees, see the ones that have struggled a little bit, look at maybe putting your finger onto why they've struggled, and just seeing what needs to be done to help improve them. We're hopefully at the point where you're not going to see, if they haven't, well, put it this way, I'll be blunt, if they haven't died by now, then they're not going to die, I wouldn't think, from the heat with summer, because we're right at the very end of things. Daylight hours are getting shorter, the temperatures are starting to drop, and we're starting to kick over into the next season, which is good. So the tree should then start building up its strength again for that period prior to the cooler winter months of dormancy. So you should have, pat yourself on the back. You've made it. If it has got weaknesses, what are you going to do about it? And start preparing for repotting. Like, seriously, start having a look around for pots and acquiring what you can now, because one of the great things about bonsai pots is that I was told a long, long time ago that you never have to water them and you never have to fertilise them. All you have to do is tuck them into a safe space, and they're always there for you when you need them. So buying them early and buying them way ahead of time is a far smarter way of doing it than waiting to the last minute, going out and then maybe compromising and being unhappy for a long period of time. Anyway, give your trees a cuddle for me. They definitely need it, and tell them well done. They've made it. We're so close to the end of summer now. So thanks for listening in. I love you all, and I'll see you next week for another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. It's been my pleasure to chat with you, and I'll see you again next week. Until then, happy bonsai.